and I'm your MC for today. It's Economic Briefing and General Membership Meeting. We do have 4 different sessions, so it's going to be airtight. So later on, if you're called up the stage and someone will need to get your pictures, please limit it, and perhaps our main photographers can take that instead. So on behalf of the MAP Board of Governors, I'd like to call this MAP Economic Briefing and General Membership Meeting to order. May I request everyone to stand up? Let's all rise for the invocation and remain standing to be followed by the Philippine National Anthem. Let us bow our heads in prayer. Our Heavenly Father, as we gather here for this MAP Economic Briefing and General Membership Meeting, we humbly come before you with gratitude for the opportunities and challenges that shape our nation. May all of us recognize that true prosperity comes from your grace. Grant wisdom to our national and local leaders as they navigate the complexities of our economic landscape. May their decisions be grounded on genuine concern for progressive Philippines. Give us strength to overcome economic challenges and inspire us to capitalize on innovative solutions that foster an environment of unity and shared prosperity. May our businesses thrive and practice shared prosperity so that the fruits of economic growth will be shared equitably among all segments of society. Protect the vulnerable so they will not be left behind in the pursuit of economic progress. Instill in us sense of hope, resilience, and help us face challenges with courage and determination. This in your holy name we pray. Amen. You may now be seated. For the welcome remarks, may I call on the President and CEO of AC Logistics Holdings Corporation, our very own MAP President. Please welcome Secretary Rene Almendras.
Thank you very much, Ida. First of all, I'd like to thank all of you for joining our general membership meeting today. And today we're going to tell you a lot about what to look forward to in the future GMMs. But I wanted to just greet some of our special guests, our guest speaker, of course, Mr. Arista Kanay, our friends from the diplomatic communities, Your Excellencies, the ambassadors, consular staff. We want to also welcome the academe and the media who are here with us. Fellow MAP members, we are very grateful that you have taken time to be with us this morning. I hope you're not expecting a long welcome address or a report from me, which normally happens, because I'd like to finish this as fast as I can. For those of you who weren't around during the inaugural meeting last January, there are 5 thrusts of the MAP, and I'd like to just show what it is. I don't want to explain it too long. Can we go to the next slide? A lot of the committees and clusters have already started meeting. We've been off to a good start. It's been a productive month for us. We wanted to show you that I wanted to emphasize just on membership engagement, because that's what we want to do today. Membership engagement is making sure that the members are happy to be members and that you take substance every time you attend our meetings. Because of that, our Vice President has worked really hard, and we now have a program of speakers for the whole year. At the board meeting earlier, our problem now is we may have more speakers than actual general membership meetings with some very interesting topics. We decided early on in December when we were planning for the year that we were going to focus on three main types of topics that we will be presenting during the GMM. We call them the series, the big issue series, the leaderships or the leaders series, and the inspire series. You will understand through the next few months why we call them so. These three things we believe is what is interesting and what is meaningful for MAP members. Our aim really is every time you attend a MAP GMM, you leave this place with a little bit more understanding on something, on either a big issue, a leadership issue, or you help and are inspired or are helping and inspiring people. At this point, may I call on our Vice President, Mr. Noel Bonoan, to explain the good speakers that we will be featuring for the balance of the year. Mind you, I'm already convincing you, please mark out the dates for these speakers because they will be substance.
Thank you, Rene. So we've got a very exciting lineup for you. Today, we have Mr. Aris Dakanay, who is a senior economist for HSBC, and he will tell you about what can we expect through the rest of the year. That'll help us prepare for our own businesses as well as get ourselves ready to do any planning. On June 19, and this is part of the Big Issue series. So on June 19, we have invited Dr. Andrew Staples. On June 19, we have invited Dr. Andrew Staples. Dr. Staples is a senior editor of The Economist, and he will talk to us about global geopolitics, how this is affecting Asia, and how this is affecting the Philippines itself. So now part of the Leaders series is that on March 12, and please here mark your calendars, we will be having our general membership meeting with U.S. Trade Secretary, Secretary of Commerce, Ms. Gina Raimondo. And Ms. Gina Raimondo will be heading the U.S. Presidential Trade and Investment Mission, which is composed of around 25 to 30 CEOs of top 500 U.S. companies. And this will be jointly held with the AmCham, with the Makati Business Club, and with the U.S. ASEAN Business Council. We will be announcing, please watch out for more details because the venue, which I can't mention just yet, will be limited to 350 people, and we expect seats to go right away, so we will be announcing, so please, it's a first come, first serve event. Now, part of the Inspired series is we have some very interesting speakers. On April 11, we have Ms. Isa Lorenzo and Ms. Rachel Rillo, who are the co-gallery directors of Silver Lens Gallery, and they will talk to us about how Philippine art is now coming to consciousness of the international art world, how international institutions such as the Guggenheim are now looking at Filipino artists and Asian artists. They will talk to us about creativity, the creative process, but more importantly, they will talk about what it takes to break into the big time in the global stage. On May 8th, we have Mr. Rob Lilwal, who is a National Geographic explorer, adventurer, and author. And Mr. Rob has traversed the globe, the highest parts, the lowest parts, and has gone to places unseen. And he will be talking about resilience and digging down deep and leading teams. And on August 14, we have Mr. James Taylor, who is a globally acclaimed speaker on super creativity and innovation in the era of artificial intelligence. These are just some of the speakers. We've got other speakers lined up, and they may happen through a GMM or through a special meeting called for that purpose, even online. But what we want you to do is watch out for the announcements, because you are in for a treat. We expect that our goal is to excite you, educate you, and engage you. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good rest of the afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Vice President Noel. In addition to that, as we did announce last time, we will be reaching out to areas outside Metro Manila. So we will be holding GMMs in Cebu. We will announce the schedule for that. And we're also targeting a general membership meeting and a recruitment meeting for Iloilo. As you know, Iloilo is the fastest growing city in the Philippines today. We'd like to show you some of the things that happened. I will not go through all of them. It's been a very busy month. I want to thank the various committees, the tax committees, the infrastructure transport committees. As you notice, we've co-signed with many other organizations on some very pressing issues that we've had. By the way, before I forget, in my conversation with the Chief of Staff of Secretary Raimundo, we were informed that she is bringing with her, as of today, 27 CEOs, senior officers of American companies who are looking to invest in the Philippines. This was as promised by President Biden to President Marcos during the visit. What we're going to try to do is we're going to try to make sure that during this membership meeting, these delegates these guests we have from the U.S. will be seated in the tables together with industry partners. We will match their line of business to the members' line of business. Why am I telling you this? Because the event is first come, first served. There are 3 organizations involved, so we can only accommodate a very small number. I really recommend watch out for the announcement, because the registration will go very fast. And we will try to match you to the correct industry table, so you will meet the guests from the U.S. related to the industries that you have. Today, we will be giving our recognition to our MAPS Life Members Awardee, who will be recognized. We will also be inducting the committee chairmans and vice chairmans. I'd like to clarify that the committee chairmen who are worried that we are requiring, or the board wants a monthly report. No, we are not asking for a monthly report. It just so happened that the template that was given to you was prepared by Mr. Rex Drilon, who wants a monthly report, who wants to do a monthly report to the board for his cluster. So you can actually, don't worry, you're not expected to produce a monthly report. We're probably looking at a quarterly or even a biannual, depending on the kind of activities and charter that you have created for your respective committees. I also want to announce on March 21, we're going to have a mixer. We're all going to go to Rojas Boulevard. As Governor Ben said, balik na naman sa Rojas Boulevard. I'm not sure what Governor Ben's experience was in Rojas Boulevard in his younger days, but there's a very nice bar on top of a good hotel with a beautiful view of the sunset. It's a sponsored event. We'd like those of you who are not going to be doing anything on March 21, please join us. It's a mixer. We want just to get to know the other members and spend time to get to know each other better. So with that, I want to thank you again for coming to our meetings. As we have announced, we would really like to make it worth your while to join our meetings. We've also decided that for some of the very important topics, we are going to open a few tables. We haven't decided exactly how many, to friends of MAP members, okay? Because some of these topics are so interesting, you may want to bring your colleagues from your office or some friends of yours that are interested in this. So we will arrange for a certain number of guests upon invitation or endorsement by MAP members. So we will announce the mechanics of that, and we will announce the number of guests that will be invited for each of those sessions. Again, we'll do it on a first-come, first-served basis because I know some of these topics are going to be hot and interesting. Thank you very much, and good morning to all of you.
Okay, we've taken note of that, like big issues, leaders, and inspired. Si Mr. Rex, quarterly report daw ha, hindi monthly. Okay, so something out of the ordinary, mini GMM, business matching, quarterly reports, mixer. Mixer, sir, with dancing ha. Okay, so we are now heading towards the awarding of certificates to life membership 2024. May I request also for MAP Vice President Noel Bonoan to join us here on stage to give the awarding certificates together with Secretary Rene. For everyone's information, life members are past presidents of MAP and those who have been regular MAP members for 20 consecutive years. Life members are exempt from paying the annual dues and they only pay for meetings they actually attend. So may I ask life membership awardees to come up on stage as soon as your name is called. Of course, our first awardee is MAP immediate past president, Attorney Dick Du Baladad, founding partner and CEO of Du Baladad and Associates, or BDD Law. A round of applause again, please, for Attorney Dick. Please stay on stage, Attorney Dick. May I also call on the other 13 awardees who have been MAP regular members for 20 consecutive years. In alphabetical order, may I call on Mr. Dante Briones, good friend, Chair and CEO of Sasondi Incorporated. And he does track and field pa, mind you, and 20 years already. General Jaime Jimmy de los Santos, AFP retired trustee of UP Foundation. I have not seen her, but the next one is Attorney Lorna Patajo Capunan, Senior Partner of Capunan and Castillo Law Offices. Oh, she's here. Good friend as well. Dancing partner and singer. Next is Mr. William Willie Lim, President of Eastern Wire Manufacturing, Inc. Next up, another good friend, Mr. Cesar Mario Cesar Mamon, who happens to be the chair and president of A Happy Place, Enchanted Kingdom. Now we have Dr. Conchita Cheat Manabat, President of Development Center for Finance. Dr. Cheat cannot make it today. We will be giving this to her. Next up, Mr. Ariel Ong, President of First PHILEC. Okay, I understand Mr. Ariel Ong cannot make it today as well. Next up, Mr. Sergio June Ortiz Luis Jr., of course everyone knows him, President of PhilExport. Next is Mr. Ernie Santiago, Director of St. Peter Group of Companies. Then we have Ms. Nelia Cruz Sarcol, President and CEO of Center for International Education. And we have now Mr. Simplicio June Umali Jr., President and General Manager of Gardenia. We have two more. We have Mr. York Vitangol, Treasurer and Director of St. Peter Life Plan, Inc. The last person's not here, Mr. Eriap. He's unfortunately abroad. Again, please, let's give a big, warm applause for the live membership awardees. We have a total of 14, which means they started in 2004. Thank you once again, live membership awardees. You can now attend MAP practically for free, except for the cost of the ones you're attending. We're now up to the second part of our session, which is the presentation of new MAP members for induction. At this point, for the presentation of the new MAP members for induction, I'd like to call on the Vice Chair of MAP Membership Committee, who is also the President and CEO of Metro Pacific Tollways Corporation, MPTC, Mr. Babes Singson.
Thank you so much, and congratulations to the lifetime members of MAP. Good afternoon, fellow MAP members, friends, ladies and gentlemen. I am pleased to announce that this afternoon we are inducting 10 new MAP members who will increase our MAP total membership from 1,089 to 1,199. So allow me to read their names, and as I read their names, may I ask them to please come on stage. First, Mr. Versian Bargola, President and CEO of Cargo Padala Express Services Forwarding. Second, Mr. Rufino Bumi Bumasang, Chair of Upgrade Energy Philippines. Third, Mr. Luher Danao, Head of Clients and Markets of the Rojas Cruz Tagle and Company. Fourth, Mr. Tony Isidro, CEO of Fuse Lending Inc., the lending arm of GCash. Six, Mr. Cesar Mario Dominic Nico Mamon, the son of our lifetime member, Cesar Mamon. Seventh, Mr. Leoncio Jun A. Palanca Jr., Country Manager of ING Bank, Manila. Number 8, Mr. Michael Mike Rojas, Chair and CEO of Rojas Cruz Tagle and Company. Number 9, Mr. Daniel Teichert. I hope I pronounced your name right. Teichert.
You forgot to mention po yung number.
Oh, okay, sorry. I missed one lady, Miss Teresa Ko. I'm sorry, I missed your name. It was right below the page. Miss Teresa Ko, Director General of East Asia Development Department of the ADB. Yeah. Number 9, I did mention Mr. Daniel Teichert. And Teresa Ko, number 10, Mr. Jose Worker, CEO and co-founder of Humble Sustainability. At this point, allow me to call on our MAP President, Mr. Rene Almendras, to lead the induction of our new MAP members. May I ask everyone to please stand to add solemnity to the occasion.
May I ask everyone to please raise your right hand and let's together recite the oath of membership. I state your name. Do hereby solemnly pledge that I will perform well and faithfully, to the best of my ability, my duties as a regular member in order to contribute to the achievement of the objectives of the Management Association of the Philippines. So help me God. Congratulations and welcome to MAP.
Kindly stay for a couple of minutes for photo op with Secretary Rene and also Mr. Babes for photo op. Thank you, Mr. Babe, Secretary Rene. Congratulations to new MAP members. We're now up to 1,199. Let's welcome and give another round of applause to the new MAP members. We can now proceed to the third part of our program, which is the induction of 24 MAP committees, chairs and vice chairs. So mapupuno tayo sa stage. May we request the chairs and vice chairs, please be ready. As soon as your name is called, please come up on stage. And we will have a group pic together with everyone. Let's start with MAP Cluster of Membership Engagement. For Arts and Culture, Chair Lorna Kapunan and Vice Chair Evelyn Singson. Please come up on stage. For MAP Person of the Year, MPY Search Committee, Chair Attorney Dick Dubaladad with Vice Chair Mr. Babe Singson. For the MPY Judging Committee, please start coming up the stage. If I've called your name, please. For the MPY Judging Committee, Chair Lilia de Lima with Vice Chair Mr. Ed Shua. For the Membership Committee, again, Chair Attorney Dick Dubalada together with Vice Chair Babe Singson, Next Gen Vice Chair Mark Makatangay, Co-Vice Chair for Visayas and Mindanao, Melanie Nang. For the Nominations and Election Committee, we have Chair Tami Lipana with Vice Chair Malu Cristobal. Those names that I've called, please do come up on stage already. For the Sports, Fellowship, and Wellness Committee, Chair Ebot Tan with Co-Vice Chair Peng Perez de Tagle and Next Gen Vice Chair George Carlos. For the second cluster, Country Competitiveness, for the Agribusiness Committee, we have Chair Oscar Toralba with 3 co-vice chairs, Senen Bacani, Ernie Ordonez, and Matthew Escobedo. For the CEO Conference Committee, we have Chair Donald Lim and Vice Chair Alma Jimenez. For the Energy Committee, the lovely Chair Ruth Owen, Vice Chair Ronald Valles, and Next Gen Vice Chair Daniel Aboitis. For the International Relations Committee, I'm wondering, where are the rest? For the International Relations Committee, we have Chair Juni Del Mundo, Vice Chair Alma Jimenez. For the National Issues Committee, again, Attorney Dick Dubalada, Vice Chair Babe Singson, and Chair Elaine Colado. For the Tax Committee, Chair Attorney Yuni Mata Perez, Co-Vice Chair Malu Lim, and Co-Vice Chair Carol Raceles. For the Trade, Investments, and Tourism Committee, Chair Alma Jimenez, Vice Chair Juni Del Mundo. For the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, Chair Eddie Yap with Vice Chair Gleiser Sikat and Next Gen Vice Chair Stan Kuanang. Next up, the MAP Cluster on Innovation, Technology, and Digitalization. For the Ease of Doing Business, Chair Rui Moreno, Vice Chair Jade Rojas Divinagracia, and Next Gen Vice Chair Ira Pozon. My recruit. For the ICT Committee, we have Chair Helen Makasaet with Co-Vice Chair Bong Paloma and the other Co-Vice Chair Teddy Sumulong. Next Gen Committee, we have Cliff Ayala with Co-Vice Chair Donna Lina, and the other Co-Vice Chair, good friend Eliza Ridoloso. And for this, the next cluster is such an important committee. Cluster on ESG and Shared Prosperity. May we call on the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee Chair Agnes Garvasio, Co-Vice Chair, I beg your pardon, Vice Chair Randy Estrelado. For the ESG and Shared Prosperity Committee, overall Chair Alex Cabrera. For the Environment Committee, Chair Regis Casas, Vice Chair Chit Juan, and Next Gen Vice Chair Reza Dadufalza Goyeneche. For the Shared Prosperity Committee, Chair Ben Tehanki, Next Gen Vice Chair Joanne Kopua. For the Governance Committee, yours truly, Ida Chongson, I'll go there in a minute, Vice Chair JJ Moreno, and Next Gen Vice Chair Manny Lisbona. And for the final cluster, the Investing in the Youth, Education Committee Chair Poch Macarañas, with 4 vice chairs, 5 vice chairs for that matter. Vice Chair for Higher Education, Sister Merceditas Ang. Vice Chair for Basic Education, Grace Aguiling Dalisay. Aguiling Dalisay. Vice Chair for Lifelong Learning, Marivic Españo. Vice Chair for Teachers Training, Bert Tuga. And the Next Gen Vice Chair, Mr. Serge Ramos. For the Health Committee, Chair Rak Kagurangan, and Vice Chair Ted Padilla, and Next Gen Vice Chair Chito Maniago. And that's it for your 5 clusters to lead the induction of the 2024 MAP Chairs and Vice Chairs. May I call back MAP President Rene Almendras and previous MAP President and DTI Secretary, Dr. Fred Pascual. Dr. Fred Pascual, if you can be our inductor.
May I request the inductees to please read your oath of office while I lead. I, having been elected to the position of the Management Association of the Philippines, do hereby solemnly pledge that I will discharge well and faithfully, to the best of my ability, the duties of my office and help advance the objectives of the MAP. So help me God. Congratulations to all.
Kindly stay for a photo op. Let me join. Once again, congratulations to MAP chairs and vice chairs. We have a lot of work to do. Yay. Thank you once again, Secretary Pascual and Secretary Almendras. We are now in the last and much awaited session, the 2024 Economic Briefing by Mr. Aris Lacanay of ASEAN HSBC, who later will be joined by MAP VP Noel Bonoan as a reactor, to be moderated by Dr. Shell Habito. In line with MAP policy and in the interest of time, we will dispense with the lengthy introduction of the speaker and reactor. Their profiles will be flashed on the screen. Again, looking forward to your presentation, Mr. Arias. The floor is yours.
Hi. Hello, mic check. Can everyone hear me at the back, I would say? Okay. Hello, hi. Before I do start, thank you very much for MAAP for inviting us here, inviting HSBC here in your event today. And I would also like to acknowledge the presence of course, Secretary Rene, Secretary Fred Pascual, Monetary Board Member Bruce Tolentino, former Secretary Chelito Habito, and of course, my former boss, former NEDA Secretary Carl Chua, whom I would really like to please today. So the title of my presentation is Strength in Numbers, because I do think it's what explains why the Philippines became the fastest growing ASEAN economy in 2023 and would likely could continue that trend come 2024. But before I do present the actual figures, the actual numbers, I want to start with a story. So I'm based in Hong Kong, and for Christmas, I visited my family. I went home for Noche Buena, and my Noche Buena was pretty much very interesting because our spread consisted of everything that was ordered through Instagram. Our sourdough bread came from a friend of ours who quit his corporate job because he learned how to bake bread during the pandemic and is now earning an income baking the bread that he just learned 2 years ago. Our brazo de Mercedes, our dessert, was also from someone, a friend of ours who quit her job and is now selling brazo de Mercedes brazo de Mercedes through Instagram, through social media. Even our scented candle was something that came from Shopee, also from a friend who quit his big corporate banking job. I, for one, I was unemployed from 2021 to 2022 because I couldn't fly to Hong Kong because of the Omicron lockdown. From the Philippines, you couldn't fly to Hong Kong. You had to make the stop in Singapore. But in those 6 months that I was unemployed, I was actually selling bottled cocktails and was selling it online because I needed to make ends meet. And that trend of making the most out of the digital space, making the most out of the very strong consumer narrative in the Philippines, that's what's driving the resilience in the Philippine economy today. It is strength by numbers. So, let's start with the numbers. There's an index called Global Economic Policy Uncertainty Index, which basically counts how many times 3 topics are mentioned in one big, in an article of one big newspaper. That's economic uncertainty, political uncertainty, and geopolitical uncertainty. If all 3 are mentioned in one article, it's considered as one. And the number is indexed to 1997. So you could see here, 1997, it was around 100. And the numbers just kept going up. And the world was at the most uncertain state during the pandemic. And it was gradually cooling. It spiked up again when Ukraine was invaded. And now it is there. It went down, but it's on the rise again. And what is this rise? What explains this rise, this rising uncertainty in the world today? The good news is it's not as certain as the pandemic. It's also not as certain as the war in Ukraine. But still, nonetheless, will uncertainty go up? In the Philippines in particular, there's one uncertainty that all my clients talk about, and one interesting data point is actually Google. So this is just a screenshot of what I did. I just typed, will a robot? And what came out? Basically, what did AI say people were searching for? Will a robot take my job? Will a robot take your job? Will a robot steal my job? Will a robot do your job? Or even, will a robot uprising happen? This is one uncertainty that actually a lot of Philippine foreign investors ask. Is artificial intelligence a big uncertainty in the Philippine economy? We'll talk about it later. But first, let's talk about the global perspective. Okay, sorry, if I may ask, where do I point for it to work? Okay, so what is the uncertainty through numbers? Global trade is actually falling. That's the bad news of it. What happened was during the pandemic, everyone was locked at home, and everyone with the monies that they were earning while at home, they couldn't travel. Instead, they bought the mechanical keyboard, a clicky keyboard, the most ergonomic chair, 2 screens instead of 1. And that resulted to a trade boom, which we saw up there. But then again, when the economy reopened, people started to divert their spending from these goods to services. They started to travel again. They started to go to restaurants. But the moment that happened, the Fed hiked interest rates, and mainland China isn't growing as fast as everyone has hoped for. And as a result, global trade is falling as of late, as high interest rates take a toll on global demand. And we haven't seen the throw yet. It is largely expected to go down further. And for that reason, we actually forecast in HSBC that all the countries, all the economies in the world will actually be growing below trend. But how will ASEAN fare? Yes, ASEAN will grow below trend, but how far? How far below? We do think ASEAN in particular will be resilient, as seen by this number. So ASEAN and China in particular, since 2002, has been becoming more important to the world. There are only 2 regions in the world economy that has seen an increase of market demand as a percentage of total demand, final demand as a percentage of total demand, and that's ASEAN and China. So here are 2 graphs to show that. So the black line here represents the ASEAN exports indexed to 2010, and the red line here represents China, and the blue line here represents the trend. And you could see here that despite this global trade slowdown that we are seeing here today, you see that ASEAN exports is still below trend. We are becoming more important to the world. Our market share we have grown in market share, and as the world slows down, our increase in market share has been keeping us resilient. People are demanding more of our goods, more of the goods that we produce. But one thing I also want to highlight is that China, although the property sector there is quite wobbly, there are a lot of headlines today saying that China is slowing down. we have to look at the numbers. And the numbers show that China, in particular, is exporting more to the rest of the world. So China is still something that we need to look out for. Okay, let's go further to ASEAN as a region. So what was the Philippines, in terms of a foreign investor, how did he see the Philippines in 2002 and 2003? Everyone was talking about inflation in the Philippines. Inflation in the Philippines in 2002 and 2003 was not only the highest, but it was also the fattest. The fattest meaning it was the slowest to go down. The good news is we're now in the middle of the pack, as seen by the end of the line here. But it's good to note that in 2002 and 2023, we saw, again, the fastest acceleration in prices. And as a result, we hiked the most aggressively in ASEAN. The black point here represents what the policy rate was before the pandemic came to be. And here is our policy rate hike, or the policy rates now. We were the only one who hiked interest rates by 250 basis points above our original policy rate. And usually as a result, if you look at it historically, every time the policy rate reaches 6% or above, growth rate, which is represented by the bar lines over here, actually falls down to 5% or below. The economy, again, slows down before 5%. But in 2023, it did not. Our full year growth rate was at 5.6%, and not only was we quite resilient, we were actually the fastest in ASEAN. We performed best, even though despite the fastest inflation rate, the highest interest rates, we still performed the best in ASEAN. And that's mainly because of how strong our labor force is, how strong the labor market here. So from 2010, here's the labor force participation rate. It increased, so basically labor supply increased. But the black line here is more important. The black line here is at 3.6%. What is 3.6%? Unemployment rate at 3.6% is the slowest ever in Philippine history. So not only is labor supply high, but the people who are supplying our labor force looking for jobs are actually able to look for jobs. And at 3.6%, of course, with more hands on deck, you could expect a very resilient Philippine economy. And what do they consist of? Okay, let's show you more of the numbers. The red line here, or at least the red dashed line, represents what the labor trend or the labor supply would be determined by the demographic trend. So what would the labor supply be based on demographic trend? The black line here represents what employment will be, again, based on demographic trend. Here are the actual numbers. The red line here, you could see the red line, the actual figures went up. And usually, labor supply goes up during hard times. What happened was inflation was high, interest rates were high, incomes were lost during the pandemic. But when face-to-face school began in August of 2022, people who were looking for their children, monitoring their children back home, actually tried their luck in the labor market. And the good news is, they did. And if you do the math here, what that last point there, minus the demographic trend, there was actually 5.7 million more workers working now than what the demographic trend would suggest. To put this in perspective, the demographic trend suggests that there would be 45 million people employed. Instead, there were 50.7 million. So just imagine, your labor force, or at least people who are contributing to the economy, grew by roughly 10%. That is a big driver, a big boost to the Philippine economy, to the economy's very strong consumption narrative. And I would make the argument that this labor boom that we're seeing right now is something that makes the Philippines unique. So we did the same exercise across the whole of ASEAN. And you could see here that Malaysia and Vietnam, they actually have less workers than what the demographic trend would suggest, mainly because their export market right now is quite not in a good place given the tech down cycle. You have Indonesia there, who's taking advantage of their nickel industry. Thailand there, basically because of the tourism recovery. But the Philippines is up there. We are experiencing the largest labor boom in ASEAN today. And who are these workers? These workers are mostly in the gig economy, mostly in the informal sector. There's no exact definition of what the informal or formal sector will be, but we look at it in terms of the persons of the number of self-employed. And you could see here that in 2017 and 2019, the informal sector, which is the largest sector in the Philippine labor force, wasn't growing at all. It was basically flat. But after the pandemic, it was now growing at 8%. The good news is the formal sector, the wage and salary workers, it has also improved. Unfortunately, the rise in unpaid family workers needs to be something that needs to be monitored. But nonetheless, the self-employment, which is again represents around 60% of the Philippine labor force, is growing by 8% compared to 0% before. And that represents, again, the 5 million people, additional people working in the Philippine economy. And they're not just, of course, they may not be the best jobs in the world, and it's pretty hard to measure that. But I would just like to highlight that this labor boom that we're seeing right now, we did the math in terms of what kind of occupations actually grew. It was mostly in services and sales. Again, this can be your sari-sari store, it can be your sari-sari stores, it can be your, let's say, street food stall vendor. But one particular trend that's pretty interesting is that since the pandemic, there were 4.5 million managers that left their position. In the labor force survey, the managers are the top tier, or at least the highest type of worker, or type of occupation there is. And there was 4.5 million that left that position and basically entered another job. It can be crafts and trades, associate professionals, plant operators, etc., etc. But most of them went to services and sales. These are my friends who are now content creators, who are your ride ref instructors, who are now your, I had a client before who was telling me that her daughter, her 14-year-old daughter, is now making videos of her drawing in YouTube and is now earning in dollars. This is, again, your very highly skilled people, highly skilled workers who are taking advantage of the digital space, who have entered the gig economy through the digital space. And it's keeping the Philippine economy resilient. One thing I also want to highlight is that I know that we are quite concerned about the weak peso. The peso hit 59 against the US dollar in October of 2022. And us in Hong Kong, we were actually a bit happy that that happened. And we're a big portion of the overseas Filipino workers. We were a bit happy because given the peso hitting 59 or at least 57 against the US dollar, you noticed here that overseas remittances actually weakened, and it continues to weaken up until today. It started to do so in 2016, and the growth of it gradually slowed down. And for 2022 and 2023 in particular, it slowed down because the peso, again, hit 57. And in our perspective, that means each of the dollar that we remit is actually more valuable than before. We actually, let's say we remit 10,000 pesos a month. We actually need to remit less dollars to achieve that 10,000 peso budget. And in that case, yes, it doesn't help in the current account, but if you look at the remittances in peso terms, it actually boomed at around 14% year-on-year growth in 2023, and that fueled the Philippine economy, the Philippine economic consumption narrative, basically. So those two things, the labor boom and strong remittances in peso terms, not in dollar terms, have helped the Philippine economy stay afloat amidst these uncertain times. but we discussed a while ago about AI. It's hard to quantify the impact of AI. And to be honest, if you ask me later during the Q&A, I don't know the impact of Q&A in the Philippines. I see AI as a chef knife. It can make a chef the most productive person in the kitchen, but it can also hurt you. And so far, if you look at what other tech companies are saying, Google is saying who in ASEAN will have the fastest, digital economic growth across ASEAN. It's actually the Philippines and Vietnam at 20%. So companies right now are quite bullish to this very digital story in the Philippines because we have the deepest mobile phone penetration rate. We have the deepest social media penetration rate. And again, it is a market, it is something that we need to look out for because what we don't want to do is for AI to replace jobs. And for now, our labor productivity has diminished as of late, has diminished below trend. And it's a good policy decision to make sure how do we make AI advantageous to the Philippine economy. We see it nowadays. We see it now. It's keeping the Philippine economy resilient. But how do we grow above that? Next, let's talk about inflation. I have to thank MAP for this. The MAP had a very big hand in bringing inflation down. In mid-2023 last year, the MAP wrote a policy paper of extending Executive Order 10. What was Executive Order 10? Executive Order 10 was originally, it was an EO by President Marcos, but it first started with President Duterte, which when inflation went higher, this EO temporarily lowered the tariff rates for rice, corn, pork, and coal. And it was set to expire, I think, by December 2022, and it was extended again to 2023. And it was basically set to expire by December 31, 2023. We did the math. Its expiration would have led to 1.4 percentage point increase in inflation. We were quite unsure whether it will be extended or not, but it did in December 22, 2023. And with that decision alone, through Executive Order 50, we lowered our inflation forecast and now expect the inflation rate to average at around 3.5% in 2024, which is within the BSP target. The inflation outlook now for the Philippines is now much better than before. Thank you for this policy. Thanks to this policy, and of course, thanks for the active participation of the MAP. Of course, it's a little bit more nuanced than that. The inflation outlook is now more benign. We could say that we're now at 2.8%. We do expect it to increase again, but largely due to base effects. We do expect it will breach target again by June or May of this year. But immediately, as soon as those base effects fade away, to immediately go back to 3%. And what would drive the inflation trajectory up in 2025 is the expiration of Executive Order 50. But inflation by then would have been low enough to be able to absorb that inflation shock and still stay within the BSP target. But there are a lot of risks. Again, as mentioned, there's a lot of uncertainty in this world. And the biggest uncertainty for the Philippine inflation outlook is rice. Global rice prices right now is at around $650 per metric ton. That's a big deal because the last time we hit 650 US dollars per metric ton, it was actually during 2008, which was back then was a global food crisis. So it's quite eerie to say that fact, and we're still uncertain how the global rice prices would actually evolve after June. So just to explain why rice prices are up right now, it's mainly because in India right now is in an election cycle, and they decided to ban the exports of rice. Note, India is the largest exporter of rice. So with the largest exporter of rice deciding to ban its exports, there was a global supply crunch and rice prices went up. We don't know, there's quite some uncertainty whether the same policy will be extended in June when election is over. If they decide to continue with the policy, we might see inflation higher. But of course, this is something that we need to monitor. Other things that we need to monitor are various, of course, inflation shocks, global economic shocks, and of course, government policies. We did the math, and we basically listed out that if ever these things happen at the same time in 2024, inflation may breach back again, may breach the BSP target again, and that may delay rate cuts. But more on that later. So what are the things that we need to look out for? A 10% increase in global oil prices, we compute that to increase the inflation outlook by 0.4 percentage points. The 2 peso jeepney fare hike that we're looking into right now due to the agenda of PUV modernization, that would increase the inflation outlook by 0.5. Local rice prices, if it increases by 10%, inflation outlook will increase by 0.9. One thing also is the minimum wage hike. It's a pretty tough call, but we did the math that what would it take for minimum wages to go back to it's equal to its 2019 purchasing power levels. And we estimate it to be around 7 to 9%. So let's stick with 8%. What would an 8% minimum wage hike, how much would it impact inflation? It would impact inflation by 1.2 percentage points based on our estimates. So again, this is something that we need to look out for, something to monitor, something that we need to strike a balance with. We are well aware that the government right now is trying to look into the possibility of a 100 peso across the board wage hike. So of course, that would have a trade-off of higher inflation, and perhaps it may result to further rebalancing in the economy. So, okay, those are the upside risks. Now let's talk about the Fed and also with the BSP. In everyone's minds, it's actually not just the Philippines, but in all over across ASEAN, the question is always, can the central bank cut ahead of the Fed? The summary is, in our view, in our published view, we do not think the BSP will cut ahead of the Fed, but it will be in lockstep with the Fed. So to basically draw this conclusion out, we have to take into consideration how sensitive the Philippine economy is to any volatility to the peso. And to realize how much foreign capital we need or how sensitive we are to changes in the Philippine peso, we need to look at the current account deficit. And the current account deficit is determined by how much we save as an economy. So what happened was, this is the investment rate. Of course, we are pursuing a very ambitious infrastructure agenda. So you see here that the investment rate before 2016, before President Duterte kicked the agenda off, our investment rate was around 20%. President Duterte then pushed for spending 5% of GDP to public infrastructure, and we saw the investment rate rise to 27%, only to deteriorate again because of the pandemic. But to stimulate the economy during the pandemic, the government decided to continue this ambitious infrastructure agenda, and the investment rate went back up to around 25%. Now, every investment needs savings to finance that investment. So how much was the Philippine economy saving? So the black line here represents our saving rate. So back then, we were saving more than we were investing. We had the funds to push for this infrastructure agenda, and we did. The saving rate went down. The saving rate was equal to the investment rate. But then the pandemic came and the saving rate crashed because people had to dip into their savings to get by the very hard times of the COVID-19 pandemic, of the COVID-19 lockdowns. The problem is, it's hard to bring your savings back up. Due to the high inflation environment, what people did was actually, up until 2022, 2023, households continued to dip into their savings to smoothen their consumption throughout these past 2 years, throughout the last high inflationary environment. And it was very hard to bring your saving rate back up. And for that reason, the BSP needed to do what it did, which was to tighten policy, incentivize saving, and basically rein in demand. But this gap over here, that gap that where the red line is above the red line, if your investment rate is higher than your saving rate, you need something to fill that gap. That gap is foreign borrowing. And what happened was in 2022, our current account deficit, which represents how much we borrowed from abroad, deteriorated to as much as more than 4% of GDP. The final numbers aren't there yet, but what our estimates, based on our estimates, we think that the current account deficit will be around 3% in 2023, 2024, and to be around 2.2% in 2025. And to put that into historical context, the last time the current account deficit was around 4% of GDP was during the onset of the Asian financial crisis. And as we all know, that wasn't really a good or sustainable time in the Philippine economy, in the ASEAN economy as a whole. So given our high dependence right now, while we're waiting for our saving rate to recover, and while we're pursuing our much needed ambitious infrastructure agenda, we need to rely on foreign capital. But as a trade-off, our reliance on foreign capital will make us quite sensitive to any volatility in the exchange rate. And for that reason, we have to mind the gap between the BSP rate and the Fed rate. So right now, the yield differential is around 100 basis points. So here, just to show what the yield differential, what the real policy rate differential is between the Philippines and the Fed, and between the US before the pandemic, we were usually at around 50 basis points. Right now, we're around negative 50 basis points. As compared to, let's say, Indonesia, which has a similar consumption narrative as the Philippines, because of core inflation, their core inflation is pretty much down. Their real policy rate differential is supports more of their currency. But before we dwell into that, that's pretty technical. I want to point to a time when the peso hit 59 against the US dollar. That was in October of 2022. That was the time when the Fed was hiking interest rates by 75 basis points, 50 basis points in, I think, 4 consecutive FOMC meetings. And as a result, the yield differentials, not just with the BSP, but also with all the central banks across ASEAN, this yield differential really deteriorated. And everyone saw a sharp depreciation of their currencies. But not everyone saw a higher risk in the financial sector. So to measure the rising, or at least risk aversion in the financial sector, we have an indicator called the TED spread. What is the TED spread? The TED spread is the interbank lending rate, so the interest rate that banks lend to each other, versus the safest asset in the economy. To standardize it across ASEAN, we use the 91 T-bill rate. The 91 T-bill rate is a very safe asset. So if the spreads widen between interbank lending and the safest asset in the economy, that means demand for the safest asset is increasing, or demand for interbank lending, basically, banks are not lending to each other, which is a sign of risk aversion. You're either going to the safest asset or removing your money from the second best. And we could see here that it was only in the Philippines where the TED spread, across ASEAN, it was only in the Philippines where the TED spread widened during that time when the FOMC was just kept hiking interest rates. So we don't think there's not much space to not repeat what happened in October 2022. I don't think, or we in HSBC do not think that cutting ahead of the Fed will keep a stable peso, or at least it might introduce the same financial jitters that we saw back then in October 2022. So for that reason, we do think the BSP will cut in lockstep with the Fed. If the Fed does 35, the BSP will do 25. And we do think the BSP will continue to do so until it reaches 5% by 3Q of 2025. Okay, so enough with the very technical stuff. Let's go to the one very positive note, and it's called the big shift. Because one of the leading, or at least one of the things that's making the world uncertain is the supply chain, is the tensions between US and China. There's a supply chain rejigging, reshoring, nearshoring. Those are the trigger words of 2022 and 2023. And the good news is ASEAN is the main beneficiary of supply chain diversification. So we have a very robust data science team in HSBC, and we counted the number of times onshoring, nearshoring, reshoring occurred in corporate calls, corporate earnings calls, sorry. And we also counted the times where new trade restrictions were put in place. And starting 2016, these new trade restrictions, or the terms reshoring, nearshoring, the number of times that these were mentioned actually exponentially increased since 2018, which is a reflection of maybe deglobalization in the world. The good news is, because of the very robust fundamentals of the Philippines and ASEAN region as a whole, everyone is moving away from a lot of parts of the world and are now moving into ASEAN. ASEAN represents 8% of the world population, but we're receiving 17 to 20% of world FDI. So that's how attractive ASEAN is in terms of FDI, in terms of investment. And for the Philippines in particular, what makes the Philippines the most attractive is how inclusive our growth is. So we did the math of basically how much of our middle class will be able to move up the socioeconomic ladder. So how much financial, we made the calculations of what is the percent change in number of adults with wealth over 250,000 USD in the economy. And for the Philippines, we predict that by 2030, the number of adults with USD 250,000 in their bank accounts will rise by 200%. This is the reason why IKEA has their biggest store in the Philippines. Our middle class is growing, our growth is inclusive, our middle class is rising, and our consumption narrative will just get stronger. So I guess that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aris. You know what's kind of interesting? I'm also into AI. While Aris was talking, I was actually downloading and making it into a transcription to get the key takeaways, Aris. Unfortunately, I didn't finish it on time. He finished his session. So anyhow, for the reactor, may I please call on MAP Vice President, who is also the Vice Chair, COO, and Head of Advisory of KPMG, RG Manabat and Company, a good, smart, witty friend as well, Attorney Noel Bonoan. Oh, you're already here.
Thank you, Ida. Is this working? Can you hear me? Okay. So, yeah, I was asked to be the reactor by default because I suppose you weren't able to look for. Here, better. Yeah, I was asked. Thank you, Carol. I was asked to be the reactor because by default we couldn't find anyone else. However, I think that we do have a good view on what's happening. I'd like to start off by pointing out that FDI net inflows started to decelerate in 2022 and decreased by 13.3% to 7.6 billion US dollars for the first 11 months of 2023. And this is because of slowing global economic growth and high inflation from increased food and fuel prices. Now, one of the leading growth indicators is what's called the approved foreign investments, which is the data from different investment agencies. And in contrast to FDI in 2023, recorded total AFI, or approved foreign investments, amounted to 16.2 billion US dollars, which is a 267% increase from 4.4 billion US dollars in 2022. Now, what is the difference between the decrease in FDI and the increase in the AFI? Well, one is it's possible that a lot of FDI didn't materialize due to delays in regulatory approvals of the projects and investments. Maybe there is a difference in timing of actual investments. No? But what I want to point out is that notwithstanding all this good news, I think it's great that we have all this good news. But the key theme here that the government has to point out is, first of all, the money has to come in faster. That means red tape has to be cut down. What am I driving at? No? Government has to be, and government has repeated that they will be competitive. And you have, for example, the Public Service Act, which now makes a definition between public utilities and public services. And hopefully, because of this, we are more competitive. You have the creation of the Anti-Red Tape Authority. But somehow, some parts of government haven't gotten the memo. I'll give you an example. It was earlier mentioned that there is a proposal to have a 100 peso legislated wage increase, and that again will have an impact on what is now a stable inflation rate. Another one where the memo doesn't seem to have been received was in the BIR. They recently came up with RMC 5-2024, which essentially imposes a hidden tax on services being paid outwards from the Philippines for services which are rendered not in the Philippines but abroad. So while I think government is taking good steps, such as appointing Secretary Frederick Go as an economic advisor to the president, much more has to be done in terms of bringing all government agencies into line and get on the competitive bandwagon. And I'm very glad, Aris, that you did mention that MAP had played a big role in ensuring that inflation was kept to very manageable levels. And I hope that MAP will continue to perform this role in the future. So that's my reaction. Michelle, on to you.
Hello, thank you. Sorry. Good afternoon. And well, my role here is to be a traffic cop. So I would ask you to prepare your questions. But let me start it off with a question about, generally good news that we saw. And I'm glad that Aris was able to essentially show that if you look a bit deeper, there's a lot more good news than looks at the surface. And I allude particularly to how we seem to have the worst numbers in most of the indicators compared to our ASEAN neighbors, except for growth. My question, though, is this. I mean, we all know that we had the deepest depression during the pandemic lockdowns compared to our neighbors. And so could that faster growth rate we're seeing these days be to a large extent the base effect, that we're coming from a much lower place? And so what I'm curious about, Aris, is whether you and your staff have looked at where the other ASEAN neighbors are now compared to where they were just before the pandemic, 2019. And are we as high above where we were before as our ASEAN neighbors are?
So to answer with facts, we're not as high as, in terms of pre-pandemic levels, as a percent of pre-pandemic levels, we're not really as high as, let's say, Vietnam and Indonesia. We're quite in the middle of the pack. We're not as, for example, Thailand hasn't recovered to their pre-pandemic levels. Singapore too is having a struggle basically because of their weak export cycle, but particularly countries that had a very strong consumption narrative, those that were quite insulated from the tech down cycle that we're seeing today, particularly Indonesia, Philippines, and Vietnam, um, we're doing much, much better compared to pre-pandemic than before. Not as good as Vietnam, not as good as Indonesia, but right there, smack in the middle.
Okay. Uh, I'd like to welcome questions from the floor. Yes, just please approach the nearest mic. We have mics across, I think, the hall. Or will the mic come to the person? I see, yeah, let me call on that lady there first. Yes. Do we have mics there? As we usually do?
Arnold, maybe we can have some more mics here on the floor.
Hi, I'm Karen De Asis from MKS Consulting. In one of your slides, there was a slide about friendshoring. Well, we call it in our industry as friendshoring or nearshoring. Strength in numbers also means, yes, greater FDI, definitely in ASEAN, including the Philippines. My question is, how do we prepare also as a country in terms of skills and other areas? Because along with the FDI, along with the friendshoring, the RCEP, and so on, comes stiff competition as well. Thank you.
So that is indeed the concern. So we did the measurement. Is this mic working? Okay. We did the measurement of who's winning in the FDI story in ASEAN. It's Vietnam and Malaysia. Vietnam and Malaysia particularly because a lot of the tech that related FDI is actually going to them. But we're also not as worse off as, let's say, Indonesia and Thailand. Again, like in terms of the growth story, we are in the middle of the pack in terms of FDI. What the Philippines needs to monitor, again, how to maximize this opportunity of everyone going to ASEAN. The West is going to LATAM, Asia is going to ASEAN. To be able to maximize this, we have to take advantage of our comparative advantage to make where we're good at even better, and that's services. We have a BPO, we have a very strong BPO industry. We are very hospitable as a reason. We're very funny as a population. We're the best. We're second best in terms of speaking English in ASEAN. First being Singapore. Now the question is, with AI coming in, how do you reskill, rejig, retool the skill sets of our Filipino people? How do we make sure that AI does not replace our jobs, but rather it complements us to make us better? And I do think we need to have a change in mindset. If the development story before was those who could have manufacture can trade more, therefore can grow more, that's what happened to Singapore. Now that services is more tradable to the rest of the world, how do we take advantage of that? How do we scale our services? How do we get better? How do we become more competitive? So that's something that we need to monitor, something that we need to basically maximize on. Yes.
Can the technicians turn on the mic, please?
Pakitulungan sa mic.
Very interesting discussion, Aris, on two numbers. Managers are leaving their jobs for the gig economy. And you are saying that the labor productivity trend of the country is actually rising very fast compared to the actual. That means we have to catch up on the productivity end, and education is the number one problem. Not only for the long term due to malnutrition, but due to the fact that many of our talents go overseas. And those who stay, as per surveys, are really in need of further training, not only in AI, but in critical thinking. This is a national problem that must be addressed. So what do you think would be a longer-term solution other than addressing what you thought were the comparisons with the current situation for the past 3 or 4 years, but down the line, 5 years, 10 years from now? Thank you.
You've said it. Education is key. Back then, during let's go back to Singapore in the 1970s, when the internet was invented, and when people were starting to begin producing chips, what Singapore did was, what Lee Kuan Yew did was, he actually required that I don't have the numbers correctly. I mean, I'm not sure of the exact numbers, but I think it's 2:1. Like every 2 students will need to have 1 computer in school. So the ratio was pretty high. It's not 1 lab for 1 batch. It's actually 2 students per computer. And if we're able to, again, if we're able to learn to teach, I mean, not just to teach, not just in terms of the capability to use a machine, to use AI, to use internet, we also need to learn how to do it ethically. With the rise of AI, with the rise of digitalization, we also expect the rise of, let's say, fake news, etc., etc. So it's both skills and ethics, and I do think the education, or at least the education curriculum in the Philippines will need to put that into importance.
All right, from the audience. Yes, Rui, and then Lorna. Please approach the mic. I hope it's working now.
You're correct in saying that we're skilled in services, and that's our outstanding competitive advantage. Now, the point is that, of course, you have education, but that's for the guys coming up. And what about these skilled workers that we have right now? And also our agricultural base. We have so many people who are in the agricultural side. I don't think that they can, at this point, handle the coming in of AI unless you can introduce it into the agribusiness side of the business. What are your thoughts on that?
Sorry, could you repeat the question again? Sorry.
Okay, again, you have education for the young people. That will take time. But right now, outside of the services sector, you have a very big group of people who are willing to work, but may not necessarily have the skills. What do you think should the government or the economists do about it? Or is this the wrong venue? Anyway, that's okay. Thank you.
In terms of the number of workers, yes, it's a lot of informal. There's a lot of, and again, it goes back to how do you improve, how do you scale where you're good at already. And I would actually go back to FDI. The more capital that you're able to finance investments, the more capital you come into, basically, to put up a factory, to bring technical know-how here to the Philippines, that will be key to make sure that that the workers that you have, the number of workers that you have, are able to become more productive instantaneously. Like for example, what Thailand did was their internal combustion engine industry, which is 1/3 of their export market base, it's now actually losing steam because no one's buying combustion engine vehicles anymore in the West or in the developed world. They're now all buying EVs. So to keep up with the time, they actually laid out a very targeted and time-bound set of incentives for EVs. And that resulted to 3 very big companies in China going into going into Thailand, and Thailand is now set to be able to produce 400,000 EVs in the next 11 months. So we have to be targeted at what industries we want to be able to develop. And I do think we can look into that in terms of how do we bring our BPO sector, at least from from your voice services, which can be replaced by AI. How do you bring them back up to, let's say, to higher levels of services? So how do you upgrade everyone?
Sorry, one final point. You made a comparison to Singapore and how they upskilled themselves back in 93 or something. But they only have a population of 4 million, 5 million at the time. So the comparison is not quite correct. Just a point. Thank you.
I think related to Rui's point is one striking number that we saw Ari show earlier was that there's a significant increase in the category called unpaid family workers. Again, that implies that there's a lot more informal sector workers and unpaid at that, because these are family workers. And I think this is probably in agriculture. One of the things noticeable these days from the statistics, from the labor force statistics, is there's a significant increase in workers in agriculture. But I suspect a lot of these, if not most of these, are of that nature, unpaid family workers. So one wonders, in fact, we need to really look at the closer details in the PSA labor data. To what extent are those service and sales workers, who are the ones who grew the most, really more of those higher level gig economy types, technology-associated types of jobs, as compared to the pajak and the fishbowl vendors, and again, the family farm workers. No? So anyway, I don't think Aris can answer that, but this tells us that we really have to look more closely into the data on these, especially on the labor force, that we are given every month now, by the way, by the PSA. It's really worth looking at. I was, sorry, before, I saw Lorna, Attorney Lorna Kapunan. I'll call on her first. Yep, yeah. And then, yeah, we go to Uni.
I think to your point, Shiel, I totally agree. Our analysts, whether here or abroad, should take a closer look at how we define employment. Because employment figures, your employment figures may be distorted because we don't really agree with the definition of the Philippine Statistics Authority on employment, because it does not include those who are not looking for jobs, i.e. family members, etc. So to say that our employment rate is high, I think is totally out of touch with what's happening on the ground. So maybe we could take a closer look at how PSA is defining employment. Secondly, there is wisdom in the saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. You have said that we're doing very well, highest, although Ciel, again, I agree with Ciel's point that if you come from low, your trajectory can only go high. And so the increase really is higher than our ASEAN neighbors. My question to you is, there's so much debate going on what should be the blueprint for the economy moving forward. And that is the Philippine Constitution, which does say developing a self-reliant Philippine economy. In your view as an analyst, does that mean bringing in foreign investments, or does it mean more protectionist provisions to make our local industries grow, to make our agriculture grow, to make our skilled workers remain in the country, and to make our education geared towards developing what is truly Filipino? I don't mean to sound political, but you have been analyzing the economy. Is opening up now to foreign investments when the Constitution already provides areas
for developing a self-reliant Philippine economy? Is it the right time?
I would say that allowing, it's not just foreign capital, it's not just foreign money, it's also foreign technology, foreign investment, technical know-how, managers. I do think now is the time, because that's the name of the game in ASEAN today. It's who gets to attract these very efficient processes abroad and be able to employ it in your country and be able to provide it more cheaply and be able to export abroad and earn, basically reach out to a larger market share and grow as an economy. It's pretty hard. During that time, the 60s or 70s, protectionism had a very handful role when producing a car was actually an activity where you do from 0 to 100. Right now, the name of the game is who could produce the best steering wheel, who could produce the best metal for your accelerator, who could do the nicest seat. It has become very specialized. The global world is now very niche per activity. And for that to happen, to have a comparative advantage to a very niche part of car making, I do think you need to have an open market. So not only are you able to export abroad, but you're also able to import what you need at the most affordable and competitive price.
Yeah, and we also have that, you know, there's that saying that no man is an island, right? And especially now where supply chains are very international and very interlinked, that we can't operate closed off from other markets, no? I think, and this is my personal opinion, it's not a MAP opinion, there is merit to looking at, there is merit to looking at revisiting some of the provisions of the Constitution. I mean, it's a very fluid and very dynamic global economy. There are major things happening across the world. Wars are happening. Trade blocks are shifting. And I'm just not sure that our Constitution is resilient enough, no, to handle everything that's happening.
And I mean, resilient enough, we have the workforce to be able to absorb it. I think I would like to add that. We are one of the most highly skilled, again, we're English speaking, we're one of the most highly skilled workforce up there. We need the jobs, we need the capital to be able to, again, be productive. But one thing I also want to highlight is it's not just opening through the Constitution. It's also becoming more attractive in a way. And it's not just the constitutional provisions that would make a country more attractive. It's also, again, how easy it is to enter your economy. I do think that we have that system in place. It's called the Ease of Doing Business Law. It was passed during Duterte's time. But we're quite not sure about how well it has progressed or how well it has been implemented. So I do think there's merit to be able to review where the bottlenecks are, how well are we implementing this policy, and if making it better, we'll be able to attract the foreign capital that we need.
Uni.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Uni Perez, the chair of Tax Committee. What I wanted to see is you said that there was increased employment in the informal sector. So meaning I would assume these are the self-employed. What I didn't see was what's the impact on that and the economy on the tax collection of the country, because it is known that the informal sector does not pay taxes. And you heard our DOF Secretary's first mandate to make up for our deficit is to collect taxes. So how do you think, what's the impact of that while we have, yes, increased consumption, increased money in the hands of the people, but I don't think that money went to the government by way of taxes. Am I right?
And I think that's the reason why, again, the current DOF secretary and the DOF secretary beforehand is really pushing for the digital services tax. It's because you want a level playing field for everyone. Whether you're working in the digital space, you have a desk job, you're a content creator, you're an influencer, everyone will need to have a level playing field. And the digital services tax will help level the playing field. Again, these are also your high-earning informal sector workers. So it's just fair.
Okay, Mike, please. Mike Makatangay.
Yeah. Good afternoon. Mike Makatangay, founder CEO of 1A Teams Consultants Singapore. Thank you very much, Aris, for sharing your insights with us. My question is, there are so many companies relocating from China and from other parts of the world, no, to ASEAN. And of course, unfortunately, Philippines is not getting as much as compared to our neighbors, Vietnam, Thailand. So what do you think are the things that the Philippines must do in order for us to get as many relocating companies and foreign direct investments? Thank you.
Before Aris answers, maybe we take in the last question from Ben, Punong Bayan.
Well, thank you, Aris, for that very good presentation. Although it was sort of presented in a broader kind of canvas, including ASEAN, but it does indicate that the Philippines is doing very well. And I think you said that yourself. Could you kindly, for many of us, we have some kind of contrary kind of perception. And maybe you could reconcile that, good kind of view with what I thought what is perceived by people on the ground. First of all is the latest survey of self-rated hunger is increasing. Second, there was a great lament about the result of the PISA survey. We are at the bottom of the totem pole, which to me implies that we have poor quality of labor. And then we talk about very low productivity in the agricultural area. And then you even mentioned that there is a declining productivity in labor. I saw that. I saw that graph. And there are a number of other things that we perceive to be not really doing well in this country. It will help us if you can just sort of, reconcile all of these things. What's really happening? Thank you.
Yeah, answer, Mike.
Yeah, okay. So just to answer the question earlier, I think, again, as mentioned, championing the EODB law will be very beneficial. Championing what we already have in place. Again, talking to foreign clients, it's all about how easy it is. It's not just being able to enter, but how easy it is to go deeper to the Philippine economy, basically, to actually put up shop. With regards to hunger, to poverty, I do admit the reason why labor boomed as well, why instead of 2 people earning in a household, there's 3, it's because these are hard times. Again, inflation went up, prices went up, a lot of incomes were lost during the pandemic. Interest rates are now higher, so it's actually harder to borrow money. People needed to smooth their consumption, and they needed the third person, maybe your kuya or your ate, to actually join the labor force and to earn extra income. So I do think in the short term, again, championing the conditional cash transfer will be very good. Continuing that, maybe increasing it, that will be good. Being able to bring prices down, make sure that your inflation rate at 2.8% goes lower or actually stays there at 2% throughout 2025, and that makes sure you actually able to import affordable food items from abroad to be able to bring inflation down, and to make sure the economy keeps on growing, to make sure that you get to bring in right now everyone's looking to go from China to ASEAN. How do we make sure they get to put up shop? So these are not long-term trends. These are now. Everyone's relocating. So everyone needs to make sure that they do relocate to the Philippines before we lose the opportunity. So it's really championing what we already have in place, making sure the macroeconomy is stable, inflation is down, so that households are able to
Okay, so
earn, I mean, buy things with the money that they earn with their third job.
okay, sorry,
Okay.
we've run out of time, so
Yeah, I
if,
think we have to just
if you
round
can wrap
up.
Yes.
Some, maybe just to cap this discussion, uh, labor and the labor force came up very prominently in our presentation. There seems to be good news, but also bad news in there. I think the implication of what we've seen is that there's a lot more informal sector employment. And while we really do have to be clear what the composition of that increased informal sector employment is, one gets this uneasy feeling that a lot more of it may have been the low-quality kind of employment, the kind that are unpaid family workers. And then this goes back also to our longer-term prospects for our labor market. And this brings me back to the strong advocacy of MAP, started last year, that we have to start from the youngest of our children right now, who may end up growing to be very low productivity workers, even though we would have much more of them compared to many other countries, if they continue to be stunted and severely malnourished right now, and therefore will have limited learning ability in school. And no matter how EDCOM 2 may fix education, if the learning ability of our children going through the school is still impaired by the malnutrition today, then the future will not look as bright. So anyway, in short, I want to remind ourselves that one of our flagship programs that is being continued by the present leadership of MAP, taking care of our future labor force by taking care of the children today. So with that, I'd like to put a close to this discussion. Thank you very much to Aris and to, of course, Noel. And thank you all for your perceptive questions.
Thank you again, Mr. Arias, Attorney Noel, Dr. Shell, for sharing your time and expertise. As Dr. Shell wrapped it up, labor is important, efficiency is important, being top of the game, but we got to start them young. So again, thank you everyone for joining us today. May we request for Secretary Almendras to come up on stage for photo op and token for our speakers and panelists. Oh, okay. Obviously, a very interesting session. Maybe we can have part 2. See you on March 12 for the joint GMM of AmCham, MBC, U.S. ASEAN Business Council, and MAP with U.S. Secretary of Commerce Gina Raimundo, head of U.S. Presidential Trade and Investment. The general membership meeting is hereby adjourned. Thank you.